Welcome to
Awesome.
Sex Talk with Natasha, everybody. So glad to be back. It's Wednesday night. Time to talk about sex. And tonight we've got a great topic about masturbation and guilt and things of that nature. So just want to thank all the patrons that have subscribed so far. I really hope that this is something of value to everybody. So we're having a lot of fun. We've been doing this for about a month, a little bit over a month. So we'd love your feedback, see if we're touching on topics that you enjoy or find valuable. And I'll turn the time over to Ashley.
Yeah, hey everybody, welcome to Sex Talk with Natasha. Really excited to have everybody here. We want to just remind everybody a little bit about the program. So for those just joining us, it's about an hour long, and the first 15 to 20 minutes, Natasha is going to give us some education on the topic. And then the next 20 minutes will be our guest, who we have a great guest today, and we're excited to have her share her questions. And then the last 20 minutes, we'll have any patrons and audience questions. So go ahead and send us those. You can message us, email us, however you want to get us those questions. And we've already gotten a few, by the way, so thank you for sending those. The first half an hour will be live streamed for free on Facebook, and then the entire episode will be on Patreon, and you can go over there and subscribe. It's patreon.com/sextalkwithnatasha. And just so everybody knows what you get with your subscription, it's a cost-effective way to get started by having access to a sex therapist, which is Natasha, obviously. You have access to the weekly show, blog posts, homework assignments, there's online courses, the community, there's just a ton of resources. And as always, if anybody wants to see Natasha professionally, you can visit her online practice, which is Symmetry Solutions, and you can go to symmetrysouls.com to get that. So we're excited. Thank you everybody for coming, and going back to Natasha.
All right. Thank you, Ashley, for all that info. So, so one of the things that, first of all, okay, there I am. Okay. One of the things that I just wanted to mention was that, so masturbation is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about, which I hope that doesn't weird anybody out that I just said that. And at the same time, it was really difficult to come up with my talking points tonight. And I was wondering why that was. And I think it's because people are kind of all over the spectrum on their values and their belief systems and their own behavior, and maybe some meaning things that come up in relationships about what masturbation means to a couple. And so I kind of tried to think about who might be listening to me. And I thought, well, maybe there's people in the audience who have a lot of anger about the shame that they felt about something that they now consider to be normative, healthy human behavior, but maybe they grew up in a system that shamed them about masturbation. So you're probably in my audience. There's probably people who they're like, I'm not sure if I have shame about masturbation, or have never really put a lot of thought into it. Or there might be people who still very much believe that masturbation is a sin or something that is incorrect behavior or unhealthy behavior in some way. And so they have concerns about masturbation. And there's probably people in the audience who are like, what are we even talking about this for? Why is this a thing? So I'm like, I don't know how to talk to all of you in 10 minutes about something valuable. So I'm going to do my best, and you can just kind of, hopefully hang in there. So I thought I would start with, understanding the idea that in this day and age, are you aware that sexuality is considered a human right? It's a civil rights issue. And not just from the perspective of what we're used to hearing, maybe in the current news with gay marriage and transgender rights. I'm talking even more basic than that, just basic human right to their bodily autonomy and to their possibility and potential for pleasure. And that there are World Health Organizations that talk about this, and that there's actually a Declaration of Sexual Rights, and I'll link to that. So this is, I think, a really good place to start, to just understand that this isn't a luxury, sexuality isn't a luxury, that this isn't something that just other people think about. This is a personal right of each person. And so some of those rights that I just want to make sure that we understand are there are the right to autonomy and bodily integrity, and the right to privacy, and the right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress, and the right to sexual education and information. Now, that's just 4 of like a long list of rights, but I picked those out because I thought that those really had to do with this topic. And why I think this is important is because in our vernacular, in the culture, I think a lot of times what's happened with masturbation is that it gets posited as something that's dirty or sinful, or something you only do if you're kind of a lonely loser, or something that is abnormal, or the amount that you do it or don't do it is abnormal. And so there's all these just kind of cultural narratives that don't help us normalize or understand the role of masturbation, just kind of from a sexual health perspective. And I don't know how many of you know, but like Cornflakes has a tie to masturbation. So something about like, if you have something bland that you can kind of, count on, that will help you not masturbate. I mean, like if you look at the history of masturbation, it's crazy. Like people blamed blindness on masturbation. People blamed senility and mental health and like, kind of all of these weird issues on masturbation. And so we have a long history of both religious and government entities getting information incorrect about human sexuality. So as usual, I don't want to downplay anybody's values. I come from a religious tradition myself. I consider myself a spiritual religious person. That doesn't necessarily mean that religions haven't been affected by culture, that governments haven't been affected by culture and policies and all of those things. And so you don't have to throw the whole thing out with the bathwater, but you do have to look critically at some of these things that we all grew up with and whether or not they're really based in, ideas that we want to keep around, not only for ourselves, but especially for parenting children if we want to pass those on. So the first thing I want to say about it, just to kind of give some information, is that masturbation is perfectly normal. Like the American Pediatric Association has been talking about this for years. I think about Ella Fitzgerald's song, like birds do it, right? Bees do it. Now, okay, I'm not Ella, but I'm just saying fetuses do it, okay? When it comes to masturbation, like we now have the technology to see a fetus touching its own genitals. We know that at about 15 to 16 weeks, that can happen. Erections can happen. Lubrication can happen. Like these are things that happen from the very beginning of our creation as human beings, that we have this component of our body being our own and being able to place our hands on our own body. And so it's really concerning to me when we've had so much pressure to not be able to have that personal autonomy. So that's one thing. 2, and I already mentioned this, religious institutions and governments don't have the best track record on sexual information. So you can be pro-religion and pro-government without necessarily agreeing with everything that they come up with. Number 3 is that masturbation has great health benefits. So we know that masturbation can be used as a coping mechanism. It can help with stress relief. It can help with chronic pain. It can help with menstrual pain. It can help with boosting your immunity. It can help cardiovascular health. It can help reduce the risk of prostate cancer. It can help just so many health benefits that this ability to have a regular amount of sexual release throughout our lives happen, and that most of us are not always going to be in a relational context. So you're not married when you're 10 or 12 or hopefully even 18. Sometimes you're an adult and you're not in a relationship. Sometimes you're a widow or you've gone through a divorce. And so you're not always in a space where you want or can have sexual interactions with other people. And so I see this as a really great self-regulatory ability to be able to take care of that need for ourselves first before we try to partner ourselves. And even in partnerships, that doesn't necessarily mean that always sex is great or happening the way it should be. So another topic. All right. So number 4 is that it's the safest sex around. I don't know why we're not like super encouraging our teens, for example, to really get in touch with masturbation so that they can understand their own body, for one, so that they can enjoy the pleasure and the benefits of sexual release when they're at a point when maybe we're not comfortable with them partnering sexually, or maybe they're too young or they're just not developed enough to have that. It can help with people who have values, such as wanting to wait for a more significant relationship or marriage so that you can enjoy sexual release, even though you're not married, things of that nature. And it's just safe. There's no STIs, there's no unwanted pregnancy, it's just safe sex. The next thing I want to talk about, and this, I want to be careful to not offend. And if you disagree with me, just hang in there with me. It's okay to disagree with me, by the way, and still listen to me. I'm perfectly fine with that. And I want to just say that I think one of the biggest romantic myths that we have in Western culture is this notion that our sexuality belongs to our partner. Right? So we give our sexuality to our partner, and therefore our partner has a lot of say about whether or not we can be sexual in certain ways. And this really starts a lot of problems for people for a variety of reasons. But in particular, I think that it's if we can try to shift a little bit how we think about that, I think it's fairly intrusive to say to a partner, your thoughts belong to me. Where you place your hands on your body, that's up to me. I don't know in this day and age that we would have lots of other relational dynamics where that would fly. Like if you try to control what your partner eats, or if you try to control your partner's money, or if you try to control your partner's hobbies or interests, that would start feeling kind of like the red flags for abuse and for controlling dynamics. And you might be talking about those things and not be very happy about those things. And so, but yet we do this oftentimes with sexuality. I see this a lot in the married couples that I see in my practice, is just this sense that if you're thinking about something other than me, or if you're masturbating without my knowledge or my permission, that somehow this has been put into the category of infidelity, or you not being trustworthy, or me not being enough in your sexual life. And so I think there's a lot of room and potential to really turn that narrative on its head, that it doesn't have to mean any of those things. But quite frankly, we have a right to our own body, our own thoughts, our own sexuality. And then it's like this honor and privilege to actually share that with somebody consensually. And I don't know, there's a lot of room there to, I think, move away from the narratives that we've been given. I don't think that people have these narratives because they're insecure or stupid or abusive. I think we have these narratives because they've been pretty much fed to us since birth. These are the narratives that we've grown up with. So I want to bring that up because I think that oftentimes, unfortunately, masturbation can feel like a threat. And one of the benefits too to masturbation in partnerships is that it can be very helpful to help with libido differences, erotic taste differences. So there's lots of benefits in that regard too. Okay, so if I haven't lost you, if I haven't totally offended you yet, what can we do about the guilt that, even if you agree with me, or even if you have to think through some of these things, or maybe if you agree with part of what I'm saying, if you experience guilt for the times that you masturbate, what can we do about it? So one of the tips I have is really like doing the cognitive work of taking your power back. that this is a cognitive shift that has to happen, from the perspective of like a thinking error. And we can, over time, practice new ways of thinking. So if you tell yourself, I have a right to my body, I have a right to my mind, I have a right to the creativity and the eroticism and the pleasure that my body and my mind come up with, because those are mine. Those belong to me. They're in here. They're mine. So I just want to encourage or invite that thought process. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you don't share that in a partnership, that it isn't important to have trust or honesty or transparency and hopefully vulnerability in a partnership, or hopefully you can talk about these things without shaming each other. But it belongs first to me. And then I'm going to decide how that gets shared with you. And a big part of that is how safe you can make it for me to share that with you. So that's one tip. Number two is use ludicrous metaphors to help you out with this. So there's lots of drives that we have. We have the drive for hunger. We have the drive for sleep. We have the drive for emotional connection, not just physical connection. And usually in none of these other areas do we build up the types of walls that we do for masturbation. So for example, I don't ever hear anybody saying, well, geez, there goes my hunger pang again. That must mean that I'm an addict, or that I'm broken, or that, I've got this big problem. It's just like, oh, I'm hungry. That's telling me something. My body is informing me that there is this need there, that I need to nourish myself in this particular way. Well, what we know about human attachment and sexuality is that this is also a need. Now, granted, if you don't have sex one day, you're not going to die. At the same time, we know that infants who are not touched in orphanages do die. Orphanages, orphans who have food and water and yet don't have touch, their immune system breaks down. So we do need attachment, and sexuality is a part of that. And this is part of why this is a sexual right. So help yourself by, thinking about metaphors and why we have a certain standard for sexuality that we don't really have for any other human behavior. And even if you do perceive it as a sin, why are you giving it so much power than other sins? So for example, I don't really have people coming in and say, well, I yelled at my kids again. It's been 3 weeks since I yelled at them last, and now I must be a yelling addict, right? So we all make mistakes. We all fall short. We all kind of maybe behave in ways that we wish we didn't, but we're not usually as hard on ourselves as we are in the realms of sexuality. Okay, number 3 tip, stop blaming masturbation for problems that are not masturbation's fault, because masturbation gets sad when we blame it for things that are not its fault. So for example, if you are masturbating for 3 hours a night instead of connecting with your partner, that's not masturbation's fault. That's a relationship issue's fault, right? That's maybe you're a little bit narcissistic type of fault, or maybe you have some social anxiety type of fault, or maybe you're depressed and we can blame depression. But let's not blame masturbation for issues that really aren't about masturbation, that they're about other things. Like I'd rather spend time with my genitals than with people, or I'd rather cope in a way, and that's the only coping mechanism I tend to have, versus having a diversity of coping mechanisms. Those are more issues around depression, anxiety, and rigidity, personality disorders. There's lots of things that you can blame. But like most sexual acts, they can be used for good, they can be used for bad. It's not that they're just bad in general. So that's another tip. And once you're kind of, trying to think through these things differently, now it's time to practice. So get into the experiential mode and really take the time to spend time with yourself and see what that's like. Maybe you're already good at that. You're just working on the guilt part. Maybe you've never really done it much, but you'd like to explore that aspect of yourself. I know for a lot of women who are anorgasmic, or maybe have a hard time knowing how they're aroused, this can be a good place to start. It's just self-exploration and figure out, what's my body capable of? What happens when I touch myself here? What happens when I think about this? So just the practicing part, I think, is really important. And not only practicing with yourself, which takes, isn't it crazy that it takes vulnerability to be with ourselves sometimes? Like, forget other people. Sometimes it's just vulnerable to sit with myself and do something that I'm not used to. But there's also something really beautiful in partnered masturbation. So in other words, letting your partner watch you masturbate or having your partner help you at first. That also takes a lot of vulnerability, and those kinds of exercises can be really helpful to join that union. Another thing is just, if you're a woman, you probably have a little bit more in the psychological hang-up department than men. Most of us were given the idea that men just kind of do this. And so if you felt guilt about it and you were a man, well, at least you knew that you were normal. It was normal to feel guilt about this. Whereas women, a lot of times, didn't even grow up with the knowledge or the idea that women did masturbate. And so if you were a masturbator as a woman from a young child, I know this was my experience. I remember writing in health class one time some question about masturbation. I don't even know that I knew what to call it. And it was probably middle school, and I was so nervous to put that paper in the box because I just knew people were going to know it was about me. And it was about, do girls do this? Because I had never known if I was just kind of a weird freakazoid or something that liked to do this, and I was the only one. So there is some shame in that regard for women who either do masturbate and didn't feel like it was normal for them to, or women who've not masturbated and then feel like, did I miss out? Am I behind? Am I abnormal because I didn't? And now everybody seems to be saying that they have. So there's a lot of kind of a little extra layer of masturbation issues for women. And then the last thing I would say is, so a lot of times people, what they tell me is that they're masturbating, it feels good, they're in the moment, they're relaxing, they have that heightened pleasure, they have that euphoria come over with release and orgasm. And then the guilt hits so soon afterwards, like, oh, that feeling of, oh, what did I do? Or, and maybe they've shifted their intellectual ideas about it, but they're still in that moment of kind of inner shame, and it can cause emotion like crying or heartache, or that sense like, what's wrong with me? Why did I do this again? So that's the toughest part, is to really start trying to let some of those feelings go through some mindfulness practices that we'll talk about probably when I get asked questions, and also just really trying to focus in on those positive aspects. So can you notice your heart racing, kind of like after some really good exercise, like, wow, like there goes my heart, it's really beating fast, or, oh, my face feels flushed and this glow that I feel, or maybe that feeling of sleepiness or relaxation, like, can I just enjoy that aspect of it? Or maybe you feel energized and you can feel kind of alive. And so noticing other things that your body is probably cluing you into, instead of maybe the shame or the guilt that you've been trained to pay attention to. And so we want to create new neural pathways in your brain so that over time, this can be a really pleasurable, fun experience for you. All right. I think that's all I have to say, Ashley.
That was absolutely amazing. And I'll go ahead and post the tips that Natasha went over both on Facebook, and we'll get to it on Patreon as well. So thank you for that. That was great. We're going to go ahead and introduce our guest here. I'm going to go ahead and unmute her. And just wanted to, let's see, are you unmuted?
Yes, I'm still here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sticking it out. We're excited to have you. We wanted to welcome Deanna. Is that right? Is that how you say it?
That was right.
Awesome. And she is from the mental health and Insta blog called Moods Reflective. And we're really excited to have her here, both to ask questions on behalf of herself, but as well as her community. So just as a reminder for everybody, we'll go about 10 minutes with Deanna, and then from there, we'll go ahead and cut off the Facebook feed so everybody can head over to Patreon. But for now, Deanna, go ahead and start asking your questions if you want to give us some of your personal experience, whatever you are most comfortable with.
Well, and even before you start asking questions, I'm so curious about this community that was mentioned. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's basically a community. It's weird to call it that because it feels so different, but it's like a community I ended up starting because I was actually going through some sort of heartbreak actually, and I just wanted an outlet basically to just, get my thoughts out there. And so it started off as that actually, but as I grew more and I started to finally get over it and all, I wanted to make it into something more that helped other people rather than just getting my own thoughts out. And so that's when I started to
Okay.
try to, yeah, that's when I started to try to, post things for other people to help others and let them know that they're not alone in the weird things they experience.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, so tell me a little bit about what you're hoping to bring to the table tonight.
Well, I'm actually wondering about certain things because, well, with my experience with masturbation, I started at a young age too. Like, I started it around maybe 8 or 9. I'm not sure if it was younger, but it's around that age range. And I remember I had like at least I think my first orgasm at 9. I had no idea what it was. I didn't know what was happening. I had this flash of a thought, oh, what if I'm pregnant? But then I was like, no, no, I'm old enough to at least know that there's a guy that has to be involved for that. So, but I was just sort of like, is this normal? I don't know what's happening. And actually, I felt a little bit of guilt then because I was like, am I too young for this? So that's one of the questions that I had was, what's too young or what's an age where it would be kind of worrisome if a child started masturbating.
That's great. There's actually no age, like mentioned earlier, right? So even like we can see babies doing this in the womb, and not to embarrass my sons, but as soon as they came out, it was like, just every time I took off a diaper, it's like hand on penis. It's just like even as infants, right? Like that's the first place their hand went. And not necessarily, I mean, masturbation is kind of an interesting word because we tend to sexualize that. And obviously, like an infant isn't having necessarily sexual thoughts or fantasies. They're just really kind of rubbing a part of their body that feels good, just like sucking your
Hmm.
thumb, right? Or rubbing your ear, or, all the different things that you see babies and toddlers doing to kind of help themselves self-soothe. And so that's a part of their body that feels particularly good. Now as they get a little bit older, so 2, 3, I mean, you see the little girls kind of kind of rubbing their their genitals
Yeah.
um, on like the shopping cart or the playground equipment, or you see little boys like kind of with their hand down their pants, watching a TV show, and they don't even really kind of recognize what's happening. Like all of this is normal. And little boys can experience erections, and also little girls can experience orgasm, and so can boys, even without necessarily ejaculation or having all that necessarily like those things that we think of more that happen with puberty. So sensation and orgasm and pleasure is something that we're capable of from a very early age. Now, some people will say, well, why did I feel guilt? It must be wrong because at 8, nobody told me that it was wrong. So it must be wrong if I felt like it was wrong. And I would usually really counter that. So, in other words, more than likely, before you can even remember, somebody told you to stop touching yourself, right? Like, oh, that's
Hmm.
yucky. Or even as part of like potty training, like, oh, yuck, don't touch down there. That's germs, or that's gross, or, wash your hands, and all this kind of hygiene type of language that, I encourage parents oftentimes to try to do potty training language in a way that's respectful of the genitals and that doesn't always couch everything in dirt and grossness and germs. So
Yeah.
yes, we want to teach hygiene, but we also want to honor the pleasure centers and their genitals just as kind of beautiful parts of their body. Another thing that just kind of happens more more in the background, it's not like we really teach kids about their genitals. I think about the, it's like the song head, shoulders, knees, and toes, right? We're
Yeah.
not usually like head, shoulders, pelvis or penis or vulva. It's like
Yeah.
we ignore that whole part of your body when we're teaching kids. And so it's not too hard to imagine that kids get a pretty quick sense that dealing with my genitals in front of my parents or in front of people is probably not a good idea. And maybe I don't totally understand why, but I probably should, be careful. So it's sad, right? It's sad when you tell me your story, which is, I think, very similar to mine and very similar to many people. Reminds me of like when you hear kind of the older generation of women saying, boy, nobody had even told me about my period. I started bleeding one day and I thought I was going to die, or I thought something was wrong with me, or that I'd cut myself. And you don't hear those stories as much now in the current vernacular because we've gotten a lot better about educating girls about their periods. But this is still something that we're not doing with sexual touch and pleasure, where you can just normalize like, hey, that looks like you're rubbing yourself or tickling yourself or whatever you want to call it, or having arousal. That probably feels good. And you can obviously direct children to private areas like, hey, why don't you go do that in your bedroom, right? Or if they're doing it kind of in front of everybody at, the Super Bowl party or something, it's like you can direct them to privacy, but you can also inform them that, hey, this feels good for a reason. Your body is kind of wired to feel good in this way. And it's one of the ways that you can relax, sleep better, and it's kind of your private business, what you want to do with it. So the short answer after my long one is no. It's never too early to start masturbating. It's never something really that people have to worry about that, that kids are doing too much or too little of, except for maybe in extreme cases where you have some OCD kids or some impulse control kids that might be like getting to the point where they're rubbing their genitals raw, but that percentage is like so low, and that's again usually a different problem that's happening that's causing that type of behavior. So perfectly normal.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in just because we're going to go ahead and stop the Facebook feed. We're going to keep going with Deanna, but everybody head over to Patreon. We're going to throw the link up on Facebook so you can head over there. So thanks, Facebook. We'll see you next week, and stay tuned. We have more with Deanna for our patrons over at Patreon.
Thank you, Facebook. We'll see you.